There's no question about the scope of the geography of the Book of Mormon, because there are hundreds of statements and inferences in the book, or from the book, that say it had to be a limited area.
I believe it was very confined in what is called Mesoamerica, with the narrow neck of land being the Isthmus of Tehuantepec. I know that many Latter-day Saints think it took place all over North and South America, but the vast majority of Book of Mormon scholars, and even some general authorities, believe it took place in a very limited area.
The distances that were involved in their references suggest that it could not, their territory could not have been greater than, say, 500 or 600 miles at the outside long and a couple of hundred miles wide. All of the events referred to in the Book of Mormon took place there.
The best evidence there is the distances they have to travel. For example, you've got one instance where I think it's the greatest amount of days it took to travel was 22 days. And then there's another account where traveling from the Lamanite capital, which ironically was the city of Nephi, to the Nephite capital, which was the city of Zarahemla, took 12 days. Well, that's not a lot. That's not a great distance.
Not thousands of miles. That the book does not say, does not claim, does not hint at. So there is a geography around a narrow neck of land that accommodates all of the movements and all of the distances, but it limits it to a few hundred miles in extent.
It was obvious to early members of the church, talked about a land northward, a land southward, and a narrow neck of land. It was the most obvious conclusion in the world to assume that that meant North America, South America, and then Central America, the Isthmus of Panama. But in fact, when you look at the distances in the Book of Mormon, of which there are a great many given, a few days' journey here, a few days' journey there, you realize this area can't be more than a few hundred miles on any side. It's a very small area. Again, much like biblical Israel or Palestine. The fact is, we all believe, John Sorensen believes, John Clark believes, I believe, that we probably have found Book of Mormon cities. We just don't know, because there aren't inscriptions informing us of what their names were. We don't know the names of these cities.
I'm not aware of any of them in Book of Mormon times where scholars know the native name for that site. When the Maya began carving the glyphs into stone so that they were preserved, one of the things that they would carve into stone is called an emblem glyph. And the emblem glyph is a set of pieces of information all put together that long ago scholars recognized was specifically connected to a certain site. It hasn't been until I think the last 10 years or so that they've been able to apply some phonetics to some of those emblem glyphs and retrieve some of the earlier names. The knowledge of those names, again, has to come after AD 250 because that's when they started carving them. Most are going to come after 400, AD 400. You have to be lucky enough to find one that we can interpret, and you've probably got a handful. The next issue with the handful of glyphs that we can identify is that they all come from areas that are outside of what's considered the geography for actual Book of Mormon peoples.
Now, Palenque is outside the area that John Sorensen, for example, identifies as Nephite and Lamanite lands.
Palenque has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon. In the geography that I espouse, Palenque belongs in the east wilderness of the Lamanites. And Palenque was a nothing little, not even a town, just a kind of a village until after 400 AD.
So that's, again, a straw man. It's not a serious point. He could have stood in St. Louis and made the same point about St. Louis. It was built much later. It has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon, and it's therefore not a Nephite city.
Before, say, 1000 AD, we know none of them.
The last article I looked up indicated that there are, I think, 30 some odd emblem glyphs where we knew the emblem glyph, which means that the maximum number of names that we could know would be 30, and I don't think we know that many. Classic difference between the Old World and the New World. Absolutely true for the Old World. People have been there, they've lived there, they passed the names on. Didn't happen in the New World. New World had a lot of different conditions. There were a lot of different people coming through, conquering the area, and then on top of all of that, you get the conquest by the Spaniards. So there are a number of things that have happened in the New World, but the end result is we have very little continuity of names. Most of the names that we have for cities in the Central American area are either Spanish or they are some Spanish version of perhaps an Aztec name. Well, the Aztecs, again, are coming in somewhere around 1200 or AD 1200. They're passing their names on to things because that's what they called them based on their culture. They're handing that to the Spaniards, and the Spaniards are basing their government in Mexico City, and so they adopt the names based on the Aztecs. So even down in Guatemala, which is pure Maya country, a lot of the names that you're going to find are based on Aztec rather than Maya languages. So there simply isn't the continuity. In a lot of cases, there isn't even continuity of peoples. Tikal is one of the more famous archaeological sites. No continuity to the modern day. This was a tremendous site, but if for instance we were to compare Tikal to something that happens in the Old World, this is Babylon, not Jerusalem. This is under the ground. This is destroyed. Nobody's living there anymore. And it isn't the only one. The major sites of the classic Maya were abandoned long before the Spaniards showed up, and the people totally forgot what the names were. So there wasn't much of a chance to have the local memory that you do in the Old World. We can envy it, but we can't replicate it.
According to Latter-day Saint scholars who have made the most study, there are some candidates that are in conflict with each other. There are more than one candidate. Which one is the right one remains to be seen. In my own work on the geography, which I believe is the most extensive, indicates to me that there is one candidate of the River Sidon that is much more likely than any other to be the correct one, and that's the Grijalva River in southern Mexico. It could be that I'm wrong. I've been wrong before on a point or two, but the evidence is strongly in favor of that over any other candidate.
Wars are not always visible in the archaeological records. You don't find a lot of battle sites with ancient remains of weaponry, for example. Unless you already know that there was a battle at the site and you look for it, you go out looking for it. We have to realize, first of all, that archaeologists do not just go out and dig anywhere they please. You don't go out in the middle of the jungle or the middle of the desert and say, oh, this looks like a good place, let's excavate here. Unless you know where to look, how are you going to get them?